Karen's here. We know.
Hello.
Welcome, and I think we are going to welcome to this second legislative dinner this year for specific reasons, which are on the agenda. We have 5 agenda items to discuss. So we should probably start with introductions. Start with this side.
Okay. My name is James Brown. I am a Chief of Popular Services with the Public Safety Department. Right now I'm filling in for our Director of Public Safety, who is out right now.
Chief of what?
It's a department that we have within Public Safety called Collaborative Services. And our Department of Public Safety is both police and fire.
Sorry, Harold Dominguez, City Manager.
Eugene May, City Attorney.
Chiquita Yarborough, City Council.
Joan Check, Longmont.
Susie Hidalgo Ferry, City Council.
Aaron Rodriguez, City Council.
Erin McCormick, State Rep for House District 11, Longmont.
Jennifer Parenti, State Rep for House District 19, East Longmont and surrounding areas.
Jenny Marsh, Assistant City Manager.
And Valerie Dodd, the Executive Director of NextLink, Longmont's internet provider.
Dave Hornbacher, Assistant City Manager, so Utilities and Public Works.
Phil Greenwald, Transportation Planning Manager.
Great. Oh, and there's Sandy Stevens, Assistant City Manager. So why was this called? Because I know we've already had a legislative dinner, which was really a lot of fun, right, Karen?
It was, and I was curious as to why this was called, so thank you.
Actually, council has been having some concerns with some of the bills that have been written in the past in 2022, 2021, that affect our ability that affect local jurisdiction a little bit, and I would turn that over to James Brown and staff. But
That's the one thing also. I just want to say one thing also.
Okay.
Well, also that we've learned that the timeline for writing and submitting bills is more now than we traditionally have our legislative minute. And so maybe you won't carry the bills, but you can help us in talking to people who might carry the bills. And so I think that's why we wanted to shift and have this meeting now instead of when you're in session.
Right, earlier is better for sure.
Yes.
It's good.
That's great. Thank you for that, Aaron. He said what I was going to say. So the first thing on our agenda is legislation that affects public safety, and I'm going to turn this over to Harold and James Brown.
So I'm going to talk pretty high level as we're moving through this because we did meet Representative McCormick on some of these issues last year, and I think what we're finding is that many of the things we're talking about are really embedded in multiple bills that have been passed over time. But to start off on a few key issues that we're dealing with. So, Eugene, I believe it was 217 that really got into officers and, when they're involved in a use of force case or not a use of force case. And really the big piece in that legislation that's really challenging for cities and for us is that there's a component in that legislation that says that if a judgment, if there's a judgment against a public safety officer, then they have to, in a serious bodily injury case, they can lose their post-certification, and in a non-SBI case, then they can lose their certification for a year. And the challenge that we're finding in this is that's really relating to what occurs in the civil system.
In what?
In the civil system, in civil trials. So it's not just criminal. So what occurs in that situation is, and we've had to deal with this, where you actually have a case that as you look at it and you review it, everything's done like it needs to be. But if that goes into the civil court system and they literally award the plaintiff $10, that's a judgment against the officer, which then goes to their license requirements. And what we're finding in that is, I would just say that the attorneys have figured it out. And so it's becoming more and more of a challenge for us because we're, as a city, literally faced with someone's career and what the civil judgment means. And it's forcing cities to make pretty tough decisions because you don't want someone to lose their career. Even as you evaluate the situation, everything makes perfect sense. And so for us, I think in talking to the council about that is something we wanted to talk to you all in terms of really seeing how we can adjust that language, because it's not a criminal defense that we're talking about. And you can't, no one knows how a jury's going to react to anything. And so it's a significant issue for us. So much so that when you look at, the impacts to our staff is, I think we could say pretty clearly, we're actually losing people in terms of public safety officers because of the impacts to them. And we've lost a lot of people that have gone to different areas just because they don't want to lose their career. I personally, in a situation, we had someone that was a long tenured officer here, great, was in a situation and decided to retire. But the fact that we're letting a civil court system actually make a decision that impacts somebody's career, and it doesn't really, who knows what the jury's going to say, it is a significant issue for us.
So,
And I was gonna just follow up because I know this is that bill that we did talk about, and my question then and still now, that even though the Attorney General came out with his stance, that doesn't help that kind of, you're in a defensive position when this happens, and the cost to city budgets to settle a case rather than have it go to court is really the issue. One of the biggest issues is that you're not going to chance losing that officer when they did absolutely everything by the book.
Right.
So the cost out of the city's pocket, when we talked about this before, and we were asking, I was asking those questions about in practice, is Longmont talking with all the other cities to come up with kind of a unified approach to this, and have there been any discussions on how to rewrite this? And because these are questions for our Judiciary Committee that works on these things, and so I do understand, and you did a really good job explaining it to me before.
So I think I think in terms of what the Attorney General said was less than specific enough to really provide some clarity.
Security,
Clarity, right?
Yeah.
I think the other piece is that the ultimate decision on that actually rests with the post board. And so, that's the clarity in this too. And in terms of getting guidance in terms of how they're going to look at that, we still haven't really seen any guidance from post. So, I think I would just say that in terms of what we're seeing, that wasn't anything that made us
Didn't help.
No.
well, and I guess my question is, and this bill was passed before I joined the legislature, so
Me too.
Yeah, I'm trying
That's
to.
okay, we're here to fix
Well, so I'm keying in on the language that you're using.
Mm-hmm.
You use the language "can" result in the loss of post certification, not will.
So if I can.
And so, I mean, I think that that's important, right? No one is necessarily saying that every police officer who has a judgment against them, particularly ones for $10, is automatically going to lose their post certification. It just means that it can go up for review. So then the question in my mind is, what are the triggers for that review? Is it their supervisors that trigger the review? Is it the post board that triggers the review? Who triggers the review?
So in the language that we're particularly we're referencing, think it's more direct than that. And I'll pull it up here. And it's in section 24-31904 of the bill. And basically, it says here, reference the judgment, and there's other pieces to it too, but the post board shall permanently revoke the peace officer certification. The post board shall not, under any circumstances, reinstate the peace officer certification or grant new certification to the peace officer unless the peace officer is exonerated by a court. And so the way that our legal advisors are interpreting that is there's no wiggle room in there. And so from a law enforcement perspective is, like, I think we can all agree on the intent of the law, right? Like, I'd be the first one to say if we had an officer who was using excessive force, that they shouldn't be a police officer anymore. And that's not what is causing us the issue. It's in those cases where our people did everything that they're supposed to do. And sometimes even when you do everything right, bad things can still happen. And we're putting our officers in an impossible situation that in those cases, even if by the letter of the law, everything that they did was right and was legal, and they've been cleared through the legal system, and their actions were justified, they can still, and oftentimes are subjected to a civil lawsuit where it's a gamble. You don't know how a jury is going to decide on that. And if a jury were to award anything in favor on a use of force case in a judgment, then we feel like the language is pretty strict in that what the consequences of that will mean. And so it's really, we're kind of stuck in that position of not being able to, even though when we look at it, like, we did everything right and our officer, performed exceptional.
Right, and you wouldn't change a thing.
We wouldn't change a
You
thing.
wouldn't change a thing.
Right, but we still can't.
Yeah.
We can't risk something going wrong, and now that officer's career and that officer's livelihood is gone.
And therefore, those officers don't want to risk coming here.
Exactly, and so since this bill has passed, we've lost almost half of our authorized strength in police officers. Now, not all of them are directly related to this, but we've lost some really great tenured officers who have either decided that they don't want to do this profession anymore because it's not worth the risk that they're taking. Not only the risk of obviously bodily harm every day, but now the risk associated with some of the consequences here. So they're either getting out of the profession altogether, or they're moving to other states to be police officers in other states. And it's been extremely challenging from that aspect as well too.
That was helpful clarification, so thank you.
And the will depends on serious bodily injury or not. And there's a distinction in that.
So that if it's serious bodily injury, it's a permanent loss of your post certification. If it's a non-serious bodily injury, then it's at least a year. So either way, it's a tremendous impact to our people.
And generally, to give you an example, and this is based on pretty factual circumstances. So you have a situation where you have a serious domestic violence case, where when you look at the individual completely battered and bloody, literally, I guess, waterboarded with alcohol, and afraid the person's going to come back. So then you start trying to search because you want to protect the victim in this case. And if you were to utilize the canine, and then the canine bites.
I saw the film.
And the person, is hiding, officers out there on his own, that immediately triggers serious bodily injury, even though you can clearly document that not responding, hiding, evading. And then all of a sudden you have this officer that is now cast into this different classification. And so that, for us, is, part of what is challenging, because we were talking about this earlier. In many cases, it's easy to look at this and watch this and dissect it, but these things happen in seconds.
Yeah.
I think generally the other thing that we're seeing, and we really appreciate the changes that were made in terms of vehicle thefts in this session. So part of what I'm going to talk about,
Oh, right.
you weren't part of the legislature when they passed this, but
Yeah.
I think generally in looking at what are the unintended consequences of legislation as it's passed, and to give you an example, while it's corrected, but one of the challenges that we were having when card thefts were moved from felonies to misdemeanors is we definitely saw an uptick. And a couple of examples, you know, we had one individual that was charged with 14 auto thefts in Longmont alone, 32 failure to appear related offenses, 5 failure to comply, and 3 eluding, and couldn't arrest him. And so they keep committing those crimes, and we have other cases with this. And so part of the challenge is that we're seeing as things are reduced, and our folks are talking to people on the streets as they're engaging with them. They are very clear with us where they know the lines exist, and they push those lines. And what happens is at the end of the day, our community is continuing to have to struggle with dealing with these issues. And when you have officers that are engaging in this and they can't arrest, or they have, what's the bond? PR bonds. And so they're not in jail, it becomes really difficult in terms of communicating with our community when they're telling us, you're not enforcing the law. You're not keeping us safe, and we see that in different areas. And I think probably one of the most significant issues wasn't here, is actually in Louisville, where Louisville police have been dealing with an individual for a substantial amount of time. They arrested him, the judge gives a PR bond, the individual goes to Denver, actually kills someone, and then Louisville's getting sued because the individual wasn't put in jail. And those are issues that we're dealing with on a constant basis and trying to figure things out. And then when you look at the drug offenses and how they were moved from felonies, you know, what we know is people are now keeping less than what the threshold is on them as they're dealing, so that if they get caught, it's a misdemeanor, and it may mean that there's a stash somewhere close by. But, you know, as we're looking at these issues, and especially as it's related to juveniles, I don't know if you've seen what we've been dealing with in our community. The lack of accountability has actually made it more difficult for us to get juveniles into our diversion programs. Because, you know, before, if there was the threat of a felony, they were more willing to engage in our rewind programs and our LCJP and go through the process. But what we're finding now is they're choosing not to. In many cases, their parents are not encouraging them to go into it, and you have parents that do. But we're seeing parents that are saying, now take you to court, the penalty's not significant enough. And so what happens is when you don't have that accountability built into the process, and you can't intervene into the early intervention programs, what happens is it continues to simmer. And then the simmer explodes on us. And we've seen a couple of cases here recently, more than a couple with juveniles, where we never had the ability to engage because they wouldn't, and there was no reason for them to engage. And I think the bigger message is, in all of these, we don't disagree with the intent, but we think what gets lost is what are the unintended consequences for the community. We were in an LADP meeting, and the superintendent was saying, not only is your police force dealing with these individuals in the community, we can't deal with them in our school system, and it's disrupting the entire school system. And so in many ways, it's handicapping us in terms of what we can do really for the safety of our community. And I think more importantly, it handicaps parents, because in many cases, parents struggle with the same issue. And if there's nothing there to force that early intervention, parents are also struggling. And, you know, we can say now that we're having significant issues, and we can go back to, we just can't do anything. And another example, we had a gun case where after one of our significant incidents, where literally, I was in a meeting with him on that. This was tangentially connected to it. It took 45 minutes to figure out how you could charge, and these were assault weapons. There were some assault weapons and handguns in it. And it took full leadership in public safety and a legal advisor. They ended up charging on a gang war defense. And then many of the charges were actually thrown out based on different laws that were in play. And so I think generally the message for me is, you know, we would love to be part of conversations. And we're here to really kind of talk about the unintended consequences, because I think we're feeling that on a regular basis, and I think our council is hearing that on a regular basis from their constituents.
If I could just provide a couple like specific examples of kind of maybe some of those unintended consequences. So when we talk about specifically juveniles with our intervention programs, you know, before when we had the potential consequence of maybe a felony charge or something a little bit more significant, being able to get the courts involved, then that's when the courts could start mandating things like counseling or mental health treatment or those type of things. When we moved away from that, and it's now most of the intervention we're doing is more on that kind of voluntary compliance standpoint, we don't have the mechanism or the pieces in place to force some of those things that, right, because we're never going to be able to solve the problem by putting someone in jail, right? So it's about trying to identify what the root causes of those problems are and trying to put solutions in place or try to get help to solve what those root problems are so that the criminal behavior stops. But we lose a lot of the ability to have that leverage. And even on the adult side, another good example with some of the changes in the drug laws is we have a program here in Longmont, and it's a program that's utilized in jurisdictions throughout Colorado. It's called our LEAP program. It's a diversion program specifically geared towards those who have substance abuse problems. So what would happen would an officer would contact somebody on the street who is a user, who's in possession of user amounts of narcotics that would usually carry a felony charge with it. What we'd be able to do with that is, in lieu of the felony charge, if you agree to participate in this program, then that felony charge won't happen. But it was always kind of that motivation for them to participate in the program. So we've lost that ability. So now we're still engaging. We're still trying to get them to engage in the program. We're still getting some people who have reached that point that they're like, I want to participate in the program and I want to get help for my substance abuse problem. But what we've lost is that motivator that oftentimes would get the foot in the door to hopefully start someone towards the path of sobriety and changing those behaviors, again, that are creating the criminal behaviors that we're seeing. So that's just a couple of examples.
Just to help me understand, people who commit misdemeanors don't get arrested, they don't go to court?
Well,
that doesn't make sense to me. I mean, some misdemeanor offenses are pretty significant crimes.
They're issued a ticket and a summons to go to court. So, and really, one of the strongest motivators of correcting that behavior or that consequence that's over their head, if you will, is the actual act of going to jail. And then
but you can go to jail for misdemeanor offenses.
Well, and there's more things at play in that isn't just the law changes when it comes to going to jail for misdemeanor charges. In Boulder County, we're unique, and that's we're dealing with jail population issues and the ability to take people to jail, and because of that, it restricts our ability. We're limited to certain offenses that we can take people to jail for. And then the backside of that too is with the bond reforms and everything like that. It's with the PR bonds, oftentimes, or I shouldn't say oftentimes, but in many cases, we'll have people that we'll take to jail, and before we're even done processing the paperwork and the reports and everything like that, they're already out. And so, and those are different things. I mean, it's kind of I think Harold started off by saying there's multiple factors at play, right? And it's kind of just created this, for lack of better terms, almost a perfect storm in our community that is creating a lot of challenges for law enforcement. So it's the reforms on law enforcement, it's the changes in the crimes themselves, it's the backing with the criminal justice system, it's the jail the jail population issues we're dealing with, and the ability to take people to, so it's a combination of all of that that's kind of playing into it.
You know, the court process at times, I know that are playing in where they just can't, they're having to let people go because there's nowhere else for them to get through the system fast enough.
And you know, another one that ties into this that I think everyone's trying to figure out is, you know, when you can do search warrants and what that really means, because what you're really dependent on, and a lot of these actually boil down to the judicial system in terms of how are they going to act in certain cases. So in terms of the legislation, what we're depending on is whether or not a judge will make an exception to the, what is it, 7 to 7?
Yeah.
The 7 to 7 time frame in
right.
search warrants. So if you have somebody that has committed a crime, a DV, and they're not in their home, but they're in a third party's home, you actually have to get a search warrant to go in, even if we know they're there.
A second search warrant.
Yeah, so
Because it's not the right address.
even if we have an arrest warrant for an individual, and it could be an arrest warrant for a homicide, it doesn't matter what it is. The arrest warrant gives us the legal authority to enter their home, to take them into custody, but if they're, let's say they're at a friend's house or something, it's a third party residence, that would be an example of where a search warrant would be required. And so, and a lot of it kind of depends on, we're gonna have to see how the judges interpret it and whether or not that would constitute an exception to that. But so in theory, we could have a wanted individual in a third party residence. It's 10 o'clock at night. We know he's in there, or we know she's in there, but we may or may not be able to get a search warrant. It just kind of depends. And we're not going to know until some of these cases come up and we see how they're being handled.
Was that in that same, the search warrant
No, that's
narrowing? It was in a different one,
It
wasn't
was
it?
in a different one.
Yeah, that was recently passed. That's Senate Bill 23254. So I think it was in this last session. It was the no-knock warrant bill.
Right.
Eliminating no-knock warrants and then reducing the search warrants to be executed between the hours of 7 a.m. and 7 p.m.
Right.
And the verbiage in there is unless authorized by a judge for good cause. The question becomes is,
That's the,
we don't know at this point what is going to be interpreted as good cause. Now, our
and it
hope
could
is...
depend on the individual judge.
Exactly.
I think you kind of want it that way, though. The last thing you want is the legislature to dictate those terms to you.
Well, I mean, that what they're saying is that's the only wiggle room there is.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's kind of like, I mean, we've had issues on bonds, and again, not legislated, but, you know, we've had some fairly significant crimes where bonds were pretty low.
And that's the judge's discretion, right?
Correct.
So how?
So that's why we're saying it's sort of, it's like you're getting hit from so many different
I've heard that
angles.
from the DA as well, like what pressures are there in the system on that side of it? I don't know, somebody tell me, what
Well, I think
do
that's a
we
hard,
do about that as well?
I think that's a hard part. I mean, if you look at the Louisville case, so you have a city that's fighting a lawsuit, not based on a decision that their officers made, but on a decision that the judicial system made. And I think I made the comment to you is, you know, in our case, when qualified immunity was stripped, you know, it makes sense, but, you know, there's the same thing where you still have qualified immunity on this other component, not to, you know, attack attorneys, but, you know, there's a piece of this is how are you accountable for your decisions and what is the impact of your decisions on a community? And I think that's kind of what we struggle with.
This is why judges are put up for re-election, or at least reappointment on the ballots. And so in my mind, the answer is to ensure that these kinds of judicial results are known.
You know what's interesting is on that, it's kind of a double-edged sword. So if you look to the east of us, it is not uncommon in the Greeley Tribune to see something in the newspaper about this is who was arrested, and here's what they're arrested for, and here's what their bonds look like. I'm not saying we want to go there, but at the same time we have to work with the judicial system, and everyone has to work within that. So there's a certain point of, are you getting into a law of diminishing returns in terms of how you're approaching this? And the other thing is, many of these cases can't be discussed because of what's in play. So it's kind of hard to, and even I mean, involved in this, I think it's hard for us to know and really make these decisions when you're looking at the judges, because you just don't know kind of how it's going and how they're working through the process. So that's there's pieces all over the place. And then when you look at the Supreme Court decision on bail, and that now you can't, everyone has to have a bail, even as to be as absurd as a serial killer. Well, now they have to have a bail. Well, now you're dependent on who's going to make that decision and how much is really in play. And so I think it's really, the overall message is, we want to help, we want to talk through this, we want to talk about what are the unintended consequences. At the same time, based on decisions that are being made in multiple arenas, it's also really trying to figure out, how do we have the tools necessary to actually keep people from going to jail? And how do we get them into our diversion programs and catch them on day one versus letting it continue to percolate? Because most of what we've spent from a budget perspective in our public safety department hasn't been for officers. We've created the lead and core group, which now we've added our 14, which is focusing on mental health and the work that James oversees, to kind of engage in that situation in a different way. We've completely revamped how we deal with juveniles, and we have our Rewind program where we actually, when they come in, we go through an evaluation system and take them through mental health services, substance abuse programs, and all of these issues. And what we're finding is they're just less likely, because you don't have that consequence that helps push over the edge.
Generally is the percentage of young folks that could potentially choose that route? And what was it before and what is it now? Like how?
I can get that to you.
I'm just curious that, because you're right, that's the alternative path that we're trying to steer these kids towards. And if you don't have that pressure.
Does it have to be an alternative path? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Well, they're
I guess that's my point.
The fact that they used to have, they were at a crossroads, that they could go through the criminal justice system and here as a potential felony on your record forever, or right at that point, you have this alternative.
Right, but my point is, why make it an alternative? Does the system not have the discretion to just say all offenders under the age of 18 will go through this program, regardless?
If they become part of the court system, yes.
Even misdemeanors go through the courts.
Well, so the differences in our Rewind program is what we're trying to do is intervene before they go into the court system, and so you don't have somebody with a record per se. And so to JB's point, it literally is the officer has the discretion to go, I can file this felony charge on you, or we can get you into the Rewind program, because we also all know that once you kind of move in through that court system, outcomes change quite a bit. And so our intent is to divert before they ever get there.
But they have to choose.
But they have to
go to
choose.
court if they don't want to.
Yeah. I know. It's
Well, no.
It's a
They
good
don't,
question.
because there are people who committed a crime, and if the courts find that they committed a crime, even if it's a misdemeanor crime, I mean, the
Well,
system
then
has
they're
broad
charged.
discretion on what they can do.
Then they're charged, that's what he said.
They can charge them and they can force them to go through these types of counseling and diversion programs.
Well, and one of the biggest drivers with our Rewind program, though, is trying to do that diversion before the court, because
Sure.
it's challenging once they, kind of what Errol was saying, is once they enter into the criminal justice system, it can be very difficult sometimes and have lifelong consequences, which is why we're really focused on our youth with our Rewind program. Can we intervene beforehand and then in that diversion prevent them from ever being charged in the criminal justice system, so that way it doesn't impact their ability to get to college, doesn't impact their ability to serve in the military, those type of things, and divert that path that, we're kind of at that intersection path, and let's divert it, to a path that leads to success versus, the other potential path.
This is a side question, just to help you visualize how that program does work. Are there folks that have been through that program that also come back to work with you to help get kids convinced to go through that way,
Almost like champions of the program. Off the top of my head with Rewind,
Well, it's new.
Oh,
So this
okay.
is only 2 to 3 years old. I can tell you, in the work that we did at the youth center, that has happened.
Yeah, I was
It's
just
where
thinking
folks are-
out loud
Yeah.
that if they can actually see that, oh,
we have seen that quite a bit with our restorative justice
yes,
programs as well too.
exactly.
That's probably the one that we see it the most of. In my personal experience as an officer with participating like in restorative justice, I've had not only people come back to them participate in the program as a volunteer, I've had people approach me on the street and talk about, how grateful they were for the opportunity to go through that
Right.
program. And I mean, I realize the challenges when you take a look at statewide and drafting laws and changes to laws and everything like that. Obviously my perspective that I'm talking about is here in my community with my police. So I don't want to ignore those challenges because I understand that 100%. But obviously the perspective that I'm speaking from is in my experience here in Longmont, my experience with our police department. I've seen the effects that it's had, that all of this has had on our police department, and they've been extremely consequential. And our mantra as a police department was that the people we hire to become police officers, we are looking for the best and the brightest, and it's challenging to retain our people. It's challenging to hire the caliber of people that we want, because of all these factors and just the everyday street life for an officer. It's I've never seen morale, and look, I know morale is kind of a fickle term, but I've never seen it as bad as it is now. The ability to get our officers and out there doing the things we're asking them to do, it's an everyday challenge, and it's kind of living through that cycle and seeing it. It's sad.
Well, that your perspective is so important, and I really do hear you. And knowing that, I've been here 30 years, and to see and be so proud of how our public safety department has become a model for not only the state but the nation. There's so many things that we have done right here, that your feedback hits hard, because I don't want our town to be like some towns that really do need a whole lot of work. We haven't typically been in that category, so I absolutely hear you, and it does concern me that we may not be able to draw that caliber of person, because we need our public safety department. We absolutely do. And I would love to know, we don't necessarily have to get into the nitty gritty tonight, but I have to go back and look at 217. I believe it was Representative Herod that was on that bill. And so I want to see who else was. But is there any, that's the one from, so I think I had said at our previous meeting that I was going to reach out to Representative Weissman, the chair of the Judiciary Committee. And that was in was that this past spring? I can't remember when we met.
That may have been
The fall?
No,
I don't even know.
I can't remember, but it was really close to the session, so we knew.
So whatever I got back from him was not sufficient enough to reassure you that there's something happening. So I will do that again. And also, this 254. That one just came out, so it has gone, the no-knock warrant, it was signed this summer.
Yeah.
So it's just now in effect. And you already have run into, or it's more, you can see where the
Right,
problems
so,
are gonna.
one of the unique challenges being a law enforcement officer, and it's the nature of it, and the impact of it, I think, is greater right now because we've seen so much change in a short period of time.
Yeah.
But, when a new court case gets decided, it can change our processes overnight.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court, with some of the recent rulings that they've had, changes. So what we used to do yesterday is now different today.
Right.
So when these new laws, get passed, these are some of the things we've got to start looking at. We got to figure out the potential impact and the changes we've got to make immediately, and we've got to retrain everybody.
Everybody's gotta know now.
Everybody's got to know now because law changes are one, court cases another, because that's what drives everything we do. Is the courts are telling us, how they're interpreting these laws, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, and when that changes, it's a cascading effect through law enforcement. And so, again, I think we're feeling it more now than we have in the past because there's been so much change in a shorter period of time, and then the court cases. And so some of this is we do our best to interpret what the courts may do, but we don't know yet because there hasn't been a case to go through yet to give us that clear guidance and that clear direction.
Right.
Well, and to be honest with you, your jobs, compared to what we're dealing with, are incredibly hard because I will be the first to say that when we see things that have happened in other communities, we're sitting there going, what are we watching? What are we seeing? And I think that's the piece where we're just saying we're here as a resource, and we would be happy to kind of, if you're seeing something, to go, okay, we get the point. Can we help? Here's the other side of this because, in the warrant piece, the no-knock warrants didn't affect us at all because we don't do it. It was really just the piece associated with the search warrants. We're unusual. I think you're seeing more cities that are moving away from the no-knock warrants, but
Yeah, I don't know that I can sit here and quote. I would say that no-knock warrants are more of a obsolete tactic or practice that's used in law enforcement.
Yeah.
I don't know that I can tell you what percentage of departments use it, but we're always evolving and always changing, and that's one of the tough things about law enforcement too. To kind of Harold's point, right, is there's not necessarily like a nationwide, this is how everything is done. And so, and we get it, and that's the reality. Nothing upsets a good cop more than a cop who is blatantly violating the laws and disgracing the profession and their duty. And I will tell you, as a leader in the police department, zero tolerance for that. And I would never, if we have someone like that, then they can't be a cop anymore. And every police officer who is worth their salt will say the same thing, because all it does is makes our job harder, because we understand the kind of the knee-jerk reaction, I can't even say knee-jerk, but the reaction to that is, well, we've got to write laws to prevent that from happening, where the majority of it is kind of like, we would never allow that to happen to begin with. And so, like, to Harold's point, we get it, we understand, we want to be a resource, we want to help mitigate some of that, and the reality is we suffer the consequences of what some of our counterparts in other areas do, and that's unfortunate, because we don't, and again, I'm speaking from the perspective of the Longmont Police Department, we do things the right way, and we have done things the right way for decades, and like I said, it's unfortunate the impact it has on the men and women who have dedicated their lives to this profession that are now looking at it saying, we hire good caliber people who can work, professional jobs in other capacities, and now they're looking at it and saying, I'm better off doing that because I can no longer, the risk of doing this job is no longer worth the value or the service I'm trying to provide.
So thank you very much. I just want to real fast see if any counselors have any comments that they want to make toward this subject.
No, I feel staff has laid it out very nicely.
Very nicely. I do want to say that I think that the bills that I'm looking at that had to do with the GR are House Bill 19-1225, and I know that was in 19, but we had the pandemic, and I think the result of that bill surfaced after we got through the horrible pandemic.
What was the title of that?
It was concerning prohibiting the use of monetary bail for certain levels of offenses, except in certain circumstances. And because it wasn't monetary, it was PR, if I interpreted right. The other one is House Bill 22-1067. So, thank you. Our next thing on the agenda is actually something that I put on with because I knew Representative Blanky was going to be here. And it is the transportation event fee to fund RTD front range passenger rail. Oh wait, there was timeline for state court cases.
I think we talked about that as well.
I recognize that it's an issue.
Oh, okay.
And our jail is full.
Yes.
There's something else you'd like to share, but I felt like it was.
Yeah.
No, clearing the slate faster. And the reason I brought it up was that I had heard, and I think it was council had heard this from our municipal judge, Frick, that he said that because of the pandemic, they were so backed up that if I believe what he said correctly, if I heard him correctly, that we didn't do night court in the state of Colorado, and that perhaps in order to clear that slate, he would like to have seen night court. I don't know if it's the same issue, but I thought I would bring that up.
Sorry.
So my time's up?
No, that means I was rude.
I think that's when I move over to Libby.
I didn't turn my thing off. Sorry.
And I am on the Front Range Passenger Rail Board and been involved with RTD for years and years and years. We were having some movement through some of the people I'm networking with from the governor's office all the way down to municipal and elected officials that I personally cannot bring a passenger rail, Front Range Passenger Rail District tax to our residents if the state, this is just for your information, unless Governor Polis is not ready to put some big money into this from the state level.
Yeah.
So what I have proposed, and we're going to have conversations at Front Range Passenger Rail District, at Northwest Mayors and Commissions, etc. And I've already talked to Dr. Cobb about it, is that we have an event fee for transportation on everybody who uses our roads. For example, on every ski ticket, a fee, a transportation fee, so not a tax, so we don't get into Tabor. And on every stop shop ticket, on every rental car in our state, and so that we can fund what we need to fund in the state without going back to the residents and saying, you need to pay more. I know it's never been done on a state level, that districts can do this, but Colorado's always been first in a lot of things.
So you want this event fee to fund all of that?
CDOT,
RTD.
RTD, and Front Range Passenger Rail District.
The comment I would make on that is that there are people who take public transportation to the ski areas or
Exactly.
to Mile High, and so is the idea then that the ticket
Yes.
also gives you public transportation for free?
And that would have to be part of the wider discussions on how does this work.
Because
And
I would say otherwise, it would be hard to support it, because then the people who are doing the right thing by taking public transportation are paying for it twice.
exactly, unless, and this would be part of my discussion, unless they're out of state. For example, we have a huge population of Texans who like to ski, come here and ski, and stock shows. I do think that the residents should get a break, but I'm not so sure. And that would be part of the general discussion. I'm just letting you know that I'm opening this up. And any comments that you have, I would love to hear as part of the larger
Review
discussion.
again who you have brought this up to.
Dr. Cobb, I've had conversations with the executive director, Doug Rex, Ron Papsdorf, who is a staff member. Front Range Passenger Rail District, we're going to have it on one of our agendas, the finance subcommittee. So Commissioner Claire Levy is very interested in it. Ashley Stoltzman is very interested in
Is there, are you to the point where folks are interested in starting to craft policy language? Or do you have a point, are you the point person, like who?
it. I'm the point person to make the noise at this
If
point.
if this were to move forward as an actual bill, where are you in the process to get it?
Just right now in the discussion, but what is, and I forgot the acronym of the transportation subcommittee that meets in the summer, is that
Oh, TLRC.
TRLC?
It
Yes.
meets next Monday, yeah.
Yeah, and
Oh,
that is where we want to take it.
To have
Oh.
a presentation, so that you can educate the community
Right.
members that this is
And
the
this is not the first time people have talked about
Exactly.
a fee on, well, I wouldn't say a fee on tickets, but the idea of allowing people with event tickets to ride RTD for free, right? Or, making that, like, that ticket their pass, to get to Coors Field or to get to Mile High.
And I talked to Deborah Johnson about that, and the districts right now have the ability to do that. It would be a contract between RTD and the Broncos, the Nuggets, and they then would place a fee on their ticket. It would be a contract between that entity.
Right.
But otherwise, all events would have this basic fee that would go into this bucket of money that was specifically to fund these projects.
Yes.
Whether individual venues or whatever, that would be a separate.
It's a different
It's
idea, but a
different.
related one.
It would be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's just beginning. I know it'd probably take a year, a minimum, to discuss it, to work it out, et cetera.
Your committee, how many meetings are you gonna have?
Are you on?
I think there's 3. I'm on TLRC. Yeah,
So-
I will
Well,
not
well.
be at the first meeting. I apologize. I have a personal obligation.
Well, is your summer agenda full though? Like this
No,
is a
no, we
time-
can-
Yeah.
So
So can you and I meet separately
Sure.
then, Brenda, because you can coach me on how to do this.
I don't know, because the transportation committee, nonpartisan staffer, has switched over right at the end of the session. Like she left right at the end of the session, and I don't know who
Okay.
the one is.
That'll be the person who's looking at it.
Exactly.
Okay.
I have to find. I don't know. We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out.
I think you're
Okay. Okay.
the person I need
I
to talk to.
like
Great.
that idea.
No, we need something. We
I
just
know
can't
we
keep
do.
going raising taxes and not getting what we
Yeah.
pay for. So
The other thing that we did, and I probably segues into another thing on your agenda, it came up in the land use bill, but it came up in other bills as well,
yes,
is really trying to get the state, by the state I mean the executive branch, to focus on ensuring that transportation investment was going to the communities that are doing the work on affordable housing. So seeing triangle of housing, transportation, and jobs,
Exactly.
right? Look at the communities that are doing the work on affordable housing, Longmont, Broomfield, you see them all around. Let's make sure that state investment in transportation and jobs are going to those communities. And as we look at programs for affordable housing, let's make sure that they're going to where the jobs are and where the transportation is. And let's see it as a pyramid that needs to be built together. And so I just want you to know that we're championing those causes.
And this was actually triggered me because in the DRCOG meeting, when of course everybody discussed 213 and was upset for very different reasons, but it was brought up that we all know that Governor Post is going to bring this back. So how can we work with him? So my idea, it really is, and DRCOG is more interested in the transit-oriented development part of this proposition. How can we help him fund it? How can we show him how to fund it rather than be against it all the time? And so this is just an idea, and I think of all the money that CDOT needs to put into I-70 and to an I-25, they drop that because they don't have the money, and I think, well, let's figure out how to get it.
Yeah, I just learned this week that it is coming back, though smartly so, it'll be 4 or 5 bills rather than what it was, because that was part of the problem. And how do you digest a 109-page bill in 3 weeks?
With 17 amendments on it.
Yeah, that was ridiculous. So, are we on to that one now?
Well, I was like, are we
let's go.
talking about 213 now?
Kind of segues.
That was
It's
just
just
I just wanted to
Okay.
make that
Yeah.
clear that this is where we're going and hear about it.
Yes.
So,
I'm glad we're having this meeting now, because it is the right time.
Yes,
Well,
so
yes.
maybe a note that next time when we start doing these meetings, to do them more around this time instead of
Yes.
sessions.
taken, absolutely.
And you may know that the House Transportation, Housing and Local Government Committee really went through 213 with a fine-tooth comb. And I do think that was the biggest takeaway, was not so much that there's a problem with trying to encourage denser housing development. Many people, understand the benefits of that from an environmental perspective, a transportation perspective, many through a water and climate perspective. But what can we do to incentivize communities to do that, or reward the ones who are already doing it? And I think that this is where it's most important, is if we're gonna have denser housing, we've gotta make sure that there's transportation there. I represent Erie. Erie was considered a tier 1 community on that list. They wanted it to build up dense, but there's no transportation, there's no jobs. Well, then you're just creating a worse problem than you had before. You're just creating denser housing that all has to commute somewhere else by car, right? That's not what we're trying to do at all, right? And so let's make sure that it's smart, and that for the communities like Longmont, Broomfield, others that have already done this work and are already on some transit corridors, let's make sure that they're really getting the services they need to make those effective and better and get the transit that they've been promised.
Exactly, and if you're rewarded with transit money, what bucket is that coming out of? I mean, where is that money? And
Well,
that's-
it's the budget that CDOT and RTD already have. It's just putting language in place that either, I don't think we can force because of the jurisdictions and so forth, but at least encourages, funnels that money towards those communities rather than, sprawl in places that aren't doing the work on affordable housing, right? That's what we're trying to avoid. Let's get more stations to Longmont rather than Highlands Ranch. I'm not picking on Highlands Ranch, but I don't think that they've done nearly as much on affordable housing that Longmont has, and so let's encourage that kind of behavior.
This also makes me think about Prop 123 and the danger that communities like Longmont that are ahead of the curve are potentially not gonna be as eligible for that funding is completely unfair. And also needs to be fixed, because how, if we already have, I don't know what the number is of affordable housing units or however it's defined, and they're saying that you have to go up 3% per year of the number you're starting with, then the communities that are doing really well and that have been are absolutely penalized.
Can I jump in? Even on top of that, one of the challenges is we're struggling right now to qualify.
Right.
So we figured we've got to bring this back to council. And so Denver, Boulder, Longmont, and Fort Collins, we're trying to put in a different number to DOLA.
Yeah.
And we were told we're going to do it the way it's described. And the challenge with that is what they're doing is they're also, in terms of the 3% growth gap, utilizing naturally occurring affordable and attainable housing. And so what it does is it actually, when you're building affordable housing and you have naturally occurring, the threshold that we have to hit is, to your point, much different than communities that aren't currently doing anything.
But they're combining naturally occurring and
Yes.
into the
Into the
whole
total
bucket.
number
Oh.
that you have to hit, and that was, one of the things we were going to send to you all separately is if there could be a caveat that's added via legislation that says cities that have been developing affordable housing, that's what it's based on, because there's also a disconnect in they're using naturally occurring affordable housing that is not deed restricted to tell you what you have to build that is deed restricted. So then it becomes an apple and an orange.
Wow.
And so, we think we found a way to go in that was palatable. But I would echo your point. Cities that have been building it are in a much different position than cities that haven't.
Is that something that can be fixed in rules through DOLA, or does it need us again?
We think it's going to need you all.
And you think you are seeing a way with language that would work?
We're working well. The cities are talking about potential language where it's impacting us, but right now we're finding a way just to get into the hopper so that we can qualify for funding.
And could you say again, Denver, Longmont, Fort Collins?
Boulder, and I'm not sure about Fort Collins, but
Okay.
yeah, Fort Collins, but
Okay.
To add just another, complexity to that conversation, something that came up during the Transportation Committee this year, that I know affects Longmont as well, is that also the way that we qualify affordable housing programs based on a county-wide AMI is not appropriate probably anymore for many of our communities, particularly those like Longmont that span two county lines. And I know, like, for instance, again, I was primarily I was in discussions with Erie at the time, so I had numbers for them, but Erie's got a very high AMI and high housing prices that go with it. The Boulder AMI was maybe just a little bit under what Erie's AMI would be, but the Weld County AMI was significantly lower than that, right? And so the numbers were all off, and you couldn't really qualify anyone, right, for affordable housing in Erie based on those numbers, because there's just not that many people living on $42,000 a year in Erie, right? And it's not appropriate to the median housing price there either. You're probably seeing those same challenges on the Boulder and the Weld County sides of Longmont as well when it comes to qualifying affordable housing. So that's something that we've asked people to start looking at, like the different advocacy groups. Is there some of that's federally mandated? It could be that federal monies maintain this sort of county AMI, but is there something that we can do that's more nuanced, for statewide funds? And that's something we're going to be looking at as well. because the mountain communities are getting sort of exceptions written
They are,
in,
yeah.
right? But it's not looking at the fact that we have those kind of disparities on the Front Range as well.
Right.
Yeah. So,
Right, thank
just a
you.
heads up.
Construction defect laws,
That was me.
okay?
Cool.
Construction
Cool.
defects law. Yeah, the CDARA enacted in 2001, right? So obviously, we're mostly concerned about condos, and that before the CDARA went into effect, somewhere around the 20% level is what we were seeing in condo construction, but we've not seen anywhere more than 2 to 4% since it's been enacted, if you will. And so I'm just wondering, I know this is specifically more around liability and insurance costs as far as the construction industry is concerned. Condo, though, doesn't necessarily indicate whether it's stacked flats, connected townhomes, or even single-family detached.
Right.
Right, and so it's kind of a nebulous term in the sense that it's all encompassing multifamily as the law is written currently, which would be more indicative of stack flats, if you will, more apartment style living. And I'm a big fan of consumer protections, don't get me wrong, but when we are talking about attainable housing specifically, these for sale products, not just affordable for sale products as well as attainable or entry level or whatever you want to call it, workforce housing. For sale products, condos is the big missing piece of that puzzle that we just can't really attract, if you will, when we're trying to. I mean, we have this huge attainable housing package. We've obviously been very robust in our affordable housing initiatives as well, and so this has been one of the biggest hurdles to maybe addressing that missing middle, as is the popular term.
And where is it simply that you think the definition of condo needs to be rewritten? Is that the issue?
Either remove maybe or utilize similarly to even how townhomes or row homes are considered in construction defects. But I know that there's a sector, I think my cousin is Senator Julie Gonzalez, just for full disclosure, that she's actually pushing a little bit harder for more consumer protection in that concept, where even single-family detached residential would be subject to the same kind of insurance and liability issues that condos currently are, and which could be a little bit troublesome.
So you gave that that piece of data that were they seeing upwards of 20% claims back in the
No, they're building about. The portfolio of new construction was about 20% condos.
condos back then, and now
Yeah.
it's much lower.
Now, like 2 to 4%.
So all of these consumer protection, construction defect laws that have gone into effect over the time, what I'm hearing is that the builders and the developers, it hasn't reflected in lower insurance costs for them.
Yet.
Yet?
Well,
Like, will it? Because you would think that if indeed the claims are decreasing and we've got all these protections in place, if that is still a barrier for developers and builders, are you seeing that?
It's a scalability issue. For instance, let's say you're in Denver and you can build a 15-story condo complex. That's a scalability issue. You can eat that, not eat it, but you can absorb that. Yeah, you can spread the liability and insurance costs amongst that many units. Here in Longmont, we currently have some height restrictions, and those kinds of issues create that hurdle as well, because they can't make the scalability to a point where it becomes financially feasible.
Yeah.
You don't happen to know off the top of your head the area statute that this exists in. I'll look it up.
The area statute,
Like the number of
the actual number of it,
the
it's
title.
been amended multiple times since. I think last time it was amended was 2017 when I read it. But it was enacted in 2001, and the CDARA is all I can remember.
Okay.
off the top of my
I'll
head.
find it.
I think part of it, and we've talked about this, so in terms of what we're doing with affordable and attainable, we're now looking at developing a for sale product and partnering in a public-private partnership. And so in one of the projects that we're looking at, the insurance cost added about $350,000 to $500,000 to the pro forma.
To what?
To the pro forma. And
I
so
don't understand what
the financials in terms of building it, in terms of
per
the entire
unit.
no, to the overall pro forma for the entire project. But when you're trying to bring affordable housing and attainable into it, your margins are tight. And so that's the point that Mayor Pro Tem was making, is it just presses it in a different way. And, you know, as we've talked about it in our programs, and that's on townhomes, that's on attached product. From a city perspective in the development of affordable and attainable, and this is us saying it as a co-developer, we would be hard pressed to say we would want to step in or get the council to step in to a condo style development because of the risk that's associated with it.
Yeah.
And I think the challenge is, you all have been hearing from the builders and the developers. I think cities own some of this too, and my colleagues own this, where we've got to step in and kind of go, here's what the impact is to us and how we do this. But, you know, it definitely moves the needle the opposite direction when we're trying to look at providing affordable and attainable homes.
Well, which is, comes back to 1, 2, 3 also. Like if you can't access that funding bucket, it's just one more pressure on being able to do this. And it's unfairly so.
And I agree. I mean, we all agree in consumer protection, and there's a need for this. You know,
Yeah.
in my past life, I was in depositions for a week on a construction defect issue. We get it. I just think similar to what we're seeing in the public safety, where people find a way to monetize something. People have found a way to monetize it, and it's just another barrier.
Everyone else carries the burden.
But no offense to the legal department, but specifically the legal industry has found a way to monetize the construction defect law, which has then exacerbated the problem, as you can imagine. So, not trying to beat up on Eugene today.
It's another conversation to bring up in front of the TLRC this summer. You ready?
No.
All right. Let's go.
It's I don't know if it's as simple as carving out condos specifically.
Jennifer, you're the one.
It's all good.
Yeah, you can have one. Well, how many, do you get to have 10 minutes come out?
I have no idea. We'll find out.
Because it doesn't count 20 minutes.
Yeah. But I don't know how many we get.
Might be 10.
But yeah, reducing the ability for litigation would probably be the factor that would shift that conversation.
Yeah.
It's come up before.
Right.
So,
I'm sure.
Okay.
And I don't know precisely where the conversation is on it, but yeah.
But yeah, as I'm sure, as far as 2 and 3 was considered, it was just too big, right? As we've all talked about, piecemealing it seems to be probably a little bit more
too
pragmatic.
big, too late also.
Also too late.
And that's more a process, not necessarily talking about specific parts of the bill, or just process.
In a way, it was kind of fun though. I literally sat with my aide, like with the entire bill spread across the table, amendment by amendment, like writing in what the language. But it was coming to committee. We had to. I was like, what does this trying to say, and what is it doing? And 155 pages, like all over the table. And actually, it was kind of fun.
He did get us talking.
What does this really say?
Well, and so similarly, the last agenda item there.
HOAs.
HOAs. Councilmember Martin, I know, has spoken on record at City Council saying that was a big piece of 213 that she really liked.
Yes.
And it was something I was also interested in.
The HOAs.
Yeah.
Tell me what you liked about what it said on HOAs.
Well, you know, Longmont, as you know, has done a lot of progressive things with land use. and also with land management around things like pesticides and xeriscape and things like that. But mostly the land use. We want all of those big yard, windy street neighborhoods be able to have ADUs. And
I really like that part too.
yeah, they should be able to have ADUs. And they've got all of this bluegrass,
Restrictions, you must have bluegrass.
Yeah, you have to have bluegrass, and they have all this bluegrass, and in the meantime, our Parks Department has done all kinds of wonderful experimental things with native turfs and native flowering plants. I was just up to Northern Water and looked at their xeriscape garden, which is just a delight to be in. But the HOAs are just same when they ought to be changing. And so all of the things that we're learning how to do with Longmont's terrain and climate are being frustrated by the HOAs.
And the bill that we did get through, certainly it's not as strong as you would want to make them do this, but what it did, the Water-Wise Landscaping, was to tell HOAs what they do have to do is have ready drought-tolerant plant plans and designs that can be modified, but they have to have 3 ready-made plans, because what we were seeing is that homeowners that really want to go there were hitting walls and hitting obstacles, and so many of these HOA boards are volunteers, and they don't have the time to figure out if this is going to work or not, so they're just getting denied. And what they will now have to do, and there's lots of resources that are being directed towards the HOA boards to make sure that we're not leaving them out in the cold to go figure this out on their own. There's nonprofits, Resource Central and others that can help them with these 3 ready-made plans, and it specifically calls out you can no longer require this 80% grass thing. That has to go. But it's going to make it easier for the homeowners. It's going to make it easier for the HOAs to make this happen. We didn't even get a lot of pushback on allowing vegetable gardens in the front yard. They still have the ability to oversee the aesthetics of what that looks like. So the HOAs worked with us through that, and we're on board, and I'm already getting questions from our own HOA about how to do that. I have another question about HOA, so that's not on here, but I'm having an issue with the sign. This is total, so while I've got you, I don't know if there's a timer on this meeting, but I need some clarification on the Longmont municipal code about yard signs. I actually went to the municipal code this afternoon thinking, okay,
Sign codes are my
Carlton
favorite.
is going to be here and I'm going to be able to ask him. Okay, so the bill from, this is okay if I do this
absolutely.
vectoring off here. The bill from whatever year it was, 2021, or
It was before the 2020 election.
that told HOAs that you are allowed to have a policy around signs about the number, the size, the whatever, it has to be content neutral or whatever. But you are, as an HOA, are allowed to have your own policy. My HOA was looking at that thinking, well, we want to write our own policy, but now we're running up against what the Longmont Municipal Code says about signs, and there's not as much flexibility, I guess, from what, for instance, if the Longmont Municipal Code on yard signs didn't exist, HOA would be able to say, we will allow, up to, you may have 2 signs in your yard at any time. In September and October, every year, you can have up to 6 signs in your yard. Like, you can't tie it to an election, you can't tie it to any specific, but they're not allowed to do that because of what the Longmont Municipal Code says about it's only 2 signs ever, and their attorney is interpreting that as even the little tiny, this home is protected by such and such,
The Brinks sign.
Brinks, security, that little tiny sign counts as one of the signs. And they're saying, well, if we want to have 2 signs in our yard during election season, we're going to have to take away the Brinks security sign in order to stay within a long month. So there's this little bit of like frustration. What do we do? Because it seems like the law statewide was more flexible, but then the city code counts for everyone.
So I don't know state law because I'm a municipal
Yes.
attorney.
Well,
A nonprofit municipal attorney.
I think there is a good measure of discretion and reasonableness during election season, right? If you see 2 election signs and a brink sign, we've got a lot worse issues.
no, I realize that. They're really trying to play by the rules. And so,
And, just as a general matter, Longmont Municipal Code trumps HOA
Exactly.
restrictions.
Exactly.
HOA should not be doing signage, that is so unhelpful.
what?
HOAs should not be enacting their own sign codes. That's super unhelpful, and
Yeah, well,
we would never enforce, we'll only enforce the municipal code.
well, and that's what I'm going to get back to her on, is that you have to follow Longmont's municipal code. It doesn't matter what the state is allowing in other areas. But then we get back to this, and I realize that we all see more signs than 2 certain times of the year, and nobody has time to go enforcing that. Like, why would you waste your resources? But it's this thing about like what counts as a sign.
And it's complaint driven.
Yeah.
And we can get in between neighbors because they tell on their neighbor.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe they don't like the sign that's in the neighbor's yard, or supporting the other candidate.
Right.
So, there's so many variations, but I do think we take a reasonable approach, go with education, we use a measure of discretion during election season because we see them everywhere in our right of way where they shouldn't be.
Right.
And so.
And it's likely that you probably wouldn't count the Brinks sign. It's
We
this
probably
big up
would.
against
We
the
would not.
bushes.
To your point, though, by the HOA being silent on the matter, it then falls onto the city for enforcement, and that might be better for your HOA too, so they don't have to worry about
To
it.
not even have a policy.
Don't even worry about it.
Just because you can.
Because there's already a city code in place.
Yeah,
It makes no
Well,
sense. to
absolve
have one that
yourself of the
conflicts
matter
with
Yeah,
city.
very good.
I don't-
That might.
Unless your HOA is like super excited about doing their own enforcement.
No, I think
Right,
that would
right.
give, I
So
think,
far,
I think that would actually give her great relief. If I could say, hey, guess what? You don't even have to write a policy. You could just let it be.
Well, and it's
Follow the municipal code.
And it's a really complicated issue because there are, on the other side of the spectrum, HOAs that say you can't put any sign up except for during election season. This question came to me once because they had one of those respect all signs
Oh, right.
that you see,
Mhm.
and they were deemed by their HOA because they don't allow any sign like that, which,
I thought the state law
But the
that was
city
passed.
does.
correct.
Yeah.
The city allows any signs anytime up to 2. Anytime.
And there's a that's a different question, but, and then
Your
there's
HOA can be more restrictive.
the HOA can be more,
But why would you want to?
Right.
I thought the state law specifically addressed some of that.
Yeah,
but
if they
that was
want to enforce
considered
it.
freedom of
This is
speech.
free speech.
Well, it does say it's also
Okay, please, or free speech.
We could use what the signs are only allowed. You can't do that. You have to just call them signs.
On the topic of HOA enforcement, one of the things that's happening this summer is we're kicking off the HOA task force. That was part of one of the bills that I passed. And so I don't know who's going to be on it yet. I'm certainly hoping to be on it, but regardless, if you've got comments or thoughts or questions or concerns, of course, I encourage you to watch the schedule and participate in the meetings if you can, but also if you just want to type up an email and send it. I'm trying to, people are just, as a bill sponsor, people are just writing me their concerns, and so I'm just trying to compile those to have the task force, and I'm happy to add your comments and the comments of any of your constituents to the list. So if you get complaints about HOAs, feel free to forward them along, and also be sure to, if there is a complaint to be had, there's a website that Dora, not Dola, Dora, it's the HOA Center runs, that they can file complaints through. And I'm sure that the task force will be reviewing a lot of those complaints as well.
Okay, thank you, that's important.
The HOA task force will kick off in August, but there will be a Metro District specific task force that kicks off later in the year, I think in November. Hoping.
Okay, this is great. Anything else? Yes.
You had said that there were bills,
That's what I heard.
bills specific to, and I don't know who, that Rep. Marmalade is.
Oh, some of these at our
Okay,
public safety.
okay, I'll have to go
Department
back
and
and
Harold
see
were
who the
talking
sponsors,
about.
I wrote the numbers down,
I
okay.
think that you signed off, but you didn't author it. I mean,
Oh, everybody signs on
I know.
everything.
but
But I
that's
know,
okay.
if I put my name on it, you're absolutely right.
No, but I would like her to be told what this was all
I
about,
will.
what our objections were,
Yes.
what we need changes. And if it could be amended this year, that would be amazing.
Yes. I'm not promising yes, but
I know. But I do know you listen, Karen. So.
I do, I listen and I process.
Yeah.
And you're right about this job being hard, but I don't think it's as hard as your job. And I would never want any of your jobs. I'm just saying. But yeah.
Mayor, I did want to mention that the Water Wise bill that Representative McCormick is discussing is one that you all supported and we really
Right.
appreciate.
Yeah,
Yes,
I
thank you.
thought that was a great bill after that. What?
What'd you say?
I'm
Joking, I'm joking.
What? After I fixed it. I know. Yeah, it was kind of a, it's all right.
I'm sorry, I can't help myself.
Some
With
things,
Representative McCormick.
like we were
I'm a
saying,
little
we have to
sorry.
laugh sometimes.
Yeah.
So we're
I
not
don't-
crying.
She brings out the worst.
I don't think I saw you laugh during the session.
I was telling her.
So this is what supper looks like.
I was crying. Yeah.
Well, I think this was great. Thank you so much for your time. Are there any
Thank
other
you.
comments?
We're gonna have public comments.
We will plan to do this again with this timing. This was-
Absolutely. This really
Yeah.
works.
This is much better. I do want to apologize for disrespecting your time by being colossally late. You probably are just glad I didn't have my mouth in here more of the time, but it was.
Glad you're here. We're glad to see you. We're glad you're here.
The only thing I would offer up is on the items you talked about, but especially affordable and attainable housing, because we are now also in the role as the housing authority and with our programs. Our staff will be available to, if there's questions or if you want any feedback, I will make sure that we're available to step in and answer whatever we can.
That's great, thank you.
So this might be a good time to see, should we combine the commissioner and the rep dinners so that the county hears what the local issues are? Would that be helpful? I mean, we can think about that before next summer, I suppose.
County dinners are their invitation to you.
Oh, that's right.
Commissioners, they're the ones that are sponsoring. Not that we couldn't invite county commissioners to this meeting, of course. Whatever
Yeah, I
the
had
council
that.
would like to do.
Conversation with two of the county commissioners earlier this week, saying the same thing, and I'm meeting with their legislative liaison, I think, next week. But it is, and same thing I'm telling them, like, what can I do to help? And the earlier the better, because I haven't pulled a single bill title yet. You probably have. But
No, I haven't.
I'm kind of in this waiting, learning, listening, mulling over stage, and this is when,
The ideas
Yeah.
come forth.
yeah.
Yeah,
So thank you.
thank you. Yeah, this works. So we can watch closer this session.
Yes.
So that next summer when you're done.
Yes.
Right. Right. Well, we'll see. This will be an interesting session.
Yeah.
Again.
Did the special session get called?
No,
No,
not unless you've heard something I haven't heard.
no, there was a call for one. You
Oh, I know.
Republicans put out the things.
No ballot, or a formation.
No.
Well, if there's nothing else, I think we should, I'd like to say adjourn, but we're not really in that type of meeting. We'll just call and say thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And
Oh, I totally forgot about that.
Yeah.
That looks like that chair that Kevin Costner.
I'll go yell at the empty chair.
And thank you for the meal too. It was really nice.